Hello students, we're going to cover Chapter 17 and 18 both by video lecture. I have uploaded for you all an Excel spreadsheet on our course on Blackboard. You'll need to open that up and print at least one copy of each of the individual worksheets within that spreadsheet. There are two versions for Chapter 17. One for our weighted average method and one for our FIFO method. And then there are two sheets for Chapter 18. Again, the weighted method and the FIFO method. But those consider things such as spoilage, and we'll talk about those more when we get to Chapter 18. You can print off as many copies as you need if you want to use them when you're doing your homework, and also for doing the ICPs. Get used to filling those items in and knowing where everything goes. They will be on Test 3. So for Chapter 17, we're talking about process costing, and we're going to see how we go through and assign the values for our work in process inventory, as well as how we transfer items out of work in process and either put them into another work in process account or into finished goods inventory. So we're going to talk about several things in regards to process costing. On a spectrum, if you were to just put these out on the line and take a look at process costing systems versus job costing systems, consider such things as custom-made homes or machines, or possibly a big cruise ship. Those types of things are distinct projects or jobs, and each one of those can have certain basic materials involved in it, but then again it could have customization to it. So it's going to have its own additional very item-specific components, and those types of things are tracked and considered in a job costing system. On the other end of the spectrum, we're talking about things that are produced in bulk, so masses of items. Typically they're exceptionally identical or the same. For example, any type of company that is producing some type of chemical. The oil refineries are a good example. Pharmaceutical industries, plastics manufacturers, brick and tile manufacturers, even semiconductor chip processing facilities. You can also think about beverages and breakfast cereals. So if we were to think about this for just a moment, who are some of the companies in Chattanooga that do these types of manufacturing? So we've got Chatham, who's over in St. Elmo. We've got Coca-Cola. We've got Pepsi. We've got Double Cola. We've got General Mills. We've got Archer Daniels Midland. We've got the Chattanooga Bakery Company over there cranking out those moon pies. Remind me in class at some juncture, I want to give you guys a link on the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce's web page to a great list that you guys could use for job hunting. It is the top 500 employers of Chattanooga, and it would be a great list for you all to use whenever you start looking for a new position. But those types of companies that I just rattled off are going to be using this process costing. And we do have a couple of methods we can use, and we're going to see how to do those in Chapter 17. And then in Chapter 18, we're going to turn it up just a notch, and we're going to consider quality control. We're going to consider scrap and things that could go wrong in our process, and we're going to see that our documents that we use have some additional line items added to them in Chapter 18. Alright, so in regards to our process costing, what we're trying to do is come up with a unit cost for each item produced. And this unit cost is going to carry on. We know that when we've got to do our income statement, we've got that cost of goods sold component. And then any items that remain within our inventory, of course, need to be on our balance sheet. And so we need to come up with a value to assign to those units so that in regards to finished goods inventory, we have a dollar amount posted. And then for our work in process inventory, those items do have a value as well on the balance sheet. So in this chapter, we're going to see how we do that. We're going to see how we take the total cost of our production, and that includes such things as the direct materials, the direct labor, the manufacturing overhead. And in this particular chapter, we're going to look at it in two distinct areas. We've got one area that we're going to call direct materials, and then the other is going to be called conversion cost. And we are going to use those two specific areas to divvy up our costs. So again, we've got direct materials and then everything else, which is the conversion cost. And we're going to use those and divvy those two costs or expenses up and use those to give our units a value. Some of these slides I'm not necessarily going to read them to you at all. I know you guys can do that, so I'll just pause for a minute so that you can look them over. So again, we've got direct materials. These, for the majority of the problems that you guys are going to see, definitely in our examples, but also in your textbook and for our test, direct materials, we're going to just go ahead and make the assumption that whenever we have units started in production, the direct materials necessary, those direct material components of the process, are going to be added at the beginning of the production process. Okay, so as soon as we start the work in the process, we're immediately going to be adding the direct materials components. This could get a lot more involved if we didn't make that assumption. Be prepared if you work in this particular area at a manufacturing company. You may be required to do some additional calculations if they do not add all direct materials at the beginning of a process. Alright, and our conversion cost, think of the direct labor folks who are continuously working on a product as it's being manufactured. That work is going to accumulate over time. So consider the conversion cost as being added along the production process, and we are going to make that assumption that it's going to be equally along the production process. Okay, so over a 30-day time period, they're going to keep the same pace. And this conversion cost we're going to talk about a little bit more when we discuss what is referred to as equivalent units. And the equivalent units is what you guys have got to get a big grip on in chapter 17 and 18. And we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Alright, so we have three ways that we can go about looking at how we do this process costing. This first one right here, to make it very, very simple and easy, we could take a look at a case where we have a process that has no beginning inventory in it, and then we start some units of production and we complete all of those units that we started and transfer them out, leaving no ending work in process inventory. Okay, to do one like that is very, very easy. I currently do not have my textbook with me. I'm pretty sure there's going to be an example in your book for what that would look like, but it's very, very easy. Within the PowerPoint slides, I'm pretty sure there's not an example of case 1. We're going to go straight on to what case 2 would look like. Case 2, we would have 0 beginning work in process inventory, and then we would add some direct materials and start some units and work on those units. We'll complete so many of the units and transfer them out. We would transfer them out either to another process where those units would get additional work in another department, or we would transfer them on to finished goods inventory. However, we would still have, in this case number 2, some units still remaining in work in process, and those units will have their direct materials, but they will not be 100% completed as to how far along they are manufactured. So imagine, if you will, Volkswagen having some cars not put all the way together yet. Okay, so they've got the axle and the chassis and all that good stuff, but they're not, they don't have their windshield, they don't have their steering wheel, they don't have this, that, and the other. They're not 100% completed yet. Therefore, they would still be sitting in the work in process account. And then lastly, with case 3, which is probably the most typical, is we're going to have beginning inventory that's work in process inventory left over from a prior period, and then we're also going to add some more direct materials and start some additional units as well. We're going to finish so many units, and then we're going to transfer out so many units, but we're also going to still have some left over at the end of our period that'll still be considered work in process. And we're going to see how to go about handling those items and their respective cost, and that's what we're having to do, is to make sure we've assigned those values for use in regards to our cost of goods sold, but also our inventory. So finished goods inventory, work in process inventory. Alright, so the case 1, again, whenever we are doing this process costing, if we don't have any beginning inventory and we don't end with any work in process inventory, then every cost that we introduced in that time frame into the process, again, direct materials plus the conversion cost, those two would get totaled up and divided by the total number of units produced, and that would give us our cost per unit, and we would use that cost per unit to put on our finished goods inventory when we transferred those items out of our process. In regards to process costing, we do have a 5-step process costing system, and you're going to basically do these steps over and over and over. Our forms vary based on which method we're going to apply, but for the most part, these 5 steps will be followed each time. Alright, so step 1, summarizing the flow of the physical units of output. Basically, what we are needing to do is to show where these units came from. Were they beginning inventory? How many units were started this time frame? And how many units are being transferred out? And how many units are remaining in work in process? Step 2, we have to do some calculations. And I'm going to show you here in a moment why this is such a big deal. But this second step, we are needing to calculate something referred to as equivalent units. And equivalent units, this is a number that we calculate, and basically what it is we're going to take the quantity of the inputs into the production process, and we are going to calculate or convert that quantity of input into an amount of completed output units that could have been made with that quantity of input. So if you want to think of it this way, if we worked really hard, and let's just say direct labor, if you can think about those labor people working on completing some units, if they had spent all that time working on units and getting them 100% complete, how many units could they have completed? Alright, so equivalent units. We're going to see this more here in a moment. You may have to rewind and listen to what I said again after looking at these. However, this might just make sense to you when I show it to you here on the slides here in a second. Summarizing our total cost to account for, again, we've got direct materials and we've got conversion cost, and we're going to show those totals on our process costing forms, and then we're going to use those values to divvy up where they need to go. Step 4, computing the cost per equivalent unit. Basically what we're going to be doing is taking those total costs and we're going to be dividing it by the equivalent unit quantities and getting a cost per equivalent unit. It's fairly easy. You'll see it here in a minute. And then lastly, we're going to assign those total costs to the units completed. The units completed get transferred out of our particular work in process and they get moved along. Okay, so the finished goods, they are either going to get transferred to another process inside the facility and get transferred out of our particular department's work in process account into another department's work in process account, or if we have completely manufactured the goods and they are ready to sell, then we would transfer them out of our work in process account straight into finished goods inventory. And we also, if we've got any ending work in process, we would need to assign a value to those units left in work in process so that we could show that value on our balance sheet. Alright, so equivalent units. This is where you guys have got to wrap your head around this. Again, it's a calculation that we make. You're going to see that we take our quantity and we are going to apply a percentage to it in order to give us what is called equivalent units. So we're converting total number of units times a percentage. And that percentage is to what extent are those X number of units complete. Right? They're not 100% complete, because if they were, we would be transferring them out. These, however, we're going to be saying for the ones left in work in process, that as to conversion cost, they are only X percentage complete. Alright, we're going to see how to do that here in just a second. Alright, so here is the top part of our form. Each one of these line items here will be represented, and you guys will need to make sure that you can fill in the numbers and do the calculations for assigning of the cost, which you're going to see on the bottom half of the form and on another slide here in a moment. So as far as step 1 goes, we've got to calculate our physical units. Alright, so we're going to summarize the flow of the physical units of output. Now again, this is case number 2, okay? We have no beginning work in process. We start some units, we complete some units, we leave some in work in process, and the rest of them are transferred out. So, here's our flow of production. Work in process beginning. For case 2, we have 0 units in physical units. We have nothing being tied over from the prior period. In this period, however, we have started 400 units. Therefore, third line item, we need to add the two together. So we've got 0 plus 400 equals 400. This is the total number of units that we need to account for. We'll actually use many of the items that we're going to see on this form as check figures. So this 400 we'll be able to use in multiple places. And then how do we go about calculating our equivalent units? We've got to break down our items into items that we've completed and transferred out, and items that are remaining in work in process. So, regarding our data, we have completed 175 of these 400 units during this period. Okay, so we're going to call those completed and transferred out during the current period. And then our work in process, whatever we did not complete and transfer out is remaining. If you take 400 and you subtract 175, then we have 225 units still in the process, not 100% complete yet. Alright, so 175 plus 225 means we've got 400 total accounted for. Now let's go now and calculate the equivalent units. And this is where you guys have got to make darn sure that you're doing this particular area correctly. Okay? So in regards to our completed and transferred out during the current period, again, they were started in this period and they've been 100% manufactured and completed during this period. So, as to direct materials, per that assumption that 100% of the direct materials are put into the process at the beginning of the process, then those 175 units have gotten 100% of their direct materials. Okay, so 175 times 100% equals 175 equivalent units as to direct materials. Also, in regards to the fact that they were 100% completed, they also got 100% of their conversion cost applied to them, and that's how they got converted 100%. Therefore, 175 times 100% equals 175 as to conversion cost. When we move down to work in process, though, we've got some things we need to tweak a little bit. Now again, following that assumption that all direct materials are put in at the beginning of the process, then these 225 units also got 100% of their direct materials. So 225 times 100% equals 225. Now, according to our data though, these 225 units are not finished yet. They are still work in process. And someone has determined that they're only 60% converted. In other words, they need to be worked on 40% more before they are finished. Right? So in order to calculate equivalent units, we need to take the 225 and we need to multiply it times 0.6 to give us 135 equivalent units. as to conversion. Now, in regards to this estimate of 60% converted, this is something that's actually estimated by someone at a facility, and the accuracy of this depends on the care and the skill of the estimator and the nature of the process. Okay, so think back to some of those types of items that we talked about. Some of those are going to be easier to come up with a conversion percentage than others. So for an example, semiconductor chips may differ substantially in the finishing necessary to obtain a final product. The amount of work necessary to finish a product may not always be easy to ascertain in advance either. Alright, so somebody's got to come up with this percentage of conversion. So 225 times 0.6 gives us 135. And now we need to tally up our equivalent units as to direct materials and as to conversion cost. And these are the numbers that we're going to use in the future steps to get an equivalent unit, a cost per equivalent unit. So 175 plus 225 equals 400, and 175 plus 135 equals 310. So we've got 400 units worth of direct materials, and as to conversion, only 310 units could have been completed 100% with the amount of conversion cost added within this period. Or actually, if we had beginning inventory, it would be conversion cost carried over as well, but you'll see that here in a moment. Alright, so step 3, 4, and 5. This is where we get into the assignment of the cost. So, the fact that this case 2 had no beginning inventory, therefore there were no costs to be carried over. So the cost that we have to account for is only made up of what we put in the process this month. Okay, so cost added during February or this particular period only is a total production cost of $50,600. It includes $32,000 for direct materials and $18,600 for conversion cost. Notice that $18,600 plus $32,000 equals $50,600. We had no beginning work in process. If we had, we would need to add that to February in order to get our total cost to account for, which, because we only have 1 month here in case 2, we've got $50,600, $32,000, and $18,600. Okay, so those speak for themselves. For step 4, we're going to take and we're going to divvy those costs up. But again, we're not going to apply it straight up to the number of units. We have got to use the equivalent units. So, as to direct materials, we've got a total of $32,000 that were added in the current period. We need to divide that by the 400 units of equivalent units for direct materials, and there we get $80 per unit for the direct materials. In regards to the conversion cost, bringing down the $18,600, we need to divide that by the 310 equivalent units as to conversion cost and get $60 per unit. Now to go about assigning the cost, recall that we have got 175 units that were 100% completed in our time frame here, which was a month, and those 175 units need to get transferred out of this work in process account, and they will either get debited into another work in process account because they need additional work and possibly direct materials to finish the products on, or if they are finished goods now, we would debit them into the finished goods inventory and credit them out of this work in process inventory. Alright, so as to the completed and transferred out, we've got 175 units. Again, that's the 175 units that were completed and transferred out. And now we need to assign the cost. So we know that our direct materials is at $80 per unit. So down here we would have 175 times 80 as for their direct materials, which if you get your calculator out and you type 175 times 80, that would be $14,000 right here for their direct materials. And then the conversion cost, again up here, $60 per unit. 175 times 60 equals 10,500 for, if I can get my mouse to cooperate, for this right here. So 10,500 plus 14,000, a total of 24,500 is the cost of our 175 units that were completed and transferred out. And that's the value that we would use when we would do those journal entries to move these units out of this work in process account. In regards to the 225 units of the 400 that still remain in work in process, we need to have them a value for the balance sheet. So again, going back up to steps 1 and 2 at the top, in regards to step 2 and our equivalent units, we had 225 equivalent units as to direct materials because of that assumption that all of the direct materials on this case were added at the beginning of the process. So 225 times 100% and then times $80 per unit, okay, from up here would give us 225 times 80, 18,000. And then the fact that these 225 units were only 60% converted, had that time and energy, etc., been spent on units that would just be completed, we would calculate out 225 times 0.6 and say that we actually could have applied that to 135 units and completely converted them, if you want to think of it that way. So 135 is our equivalent units. 135 times 60 equals 8,100. So 18,000 plus 8,100 equals 26,100. And this 26,100 would of course remain on our balance sheet for our work in process inventory. Paying special attention to this, when we go to case number 3, we're actually going to use this information right here to start our next period and show you an example of a period where it does have a beginning work in process value. That of course would add some additional steps to our process costing form. Hang on. So down here, recall that I said we had 18,000 in direct materials and 8,100 as to conversion cost that are going to be held in this work in process account. So when we go to case 3, you're going to see where we pick up where we're leaving off. Okay. Again, if you wanted to see how the T accounts look for the general ledger and the cost flow, we've got our work in process account that those values would have been debited into for the direct materials and the conversion cost. And then we would have completed so many units and transferred them out. That was the total of 24,500. That would move on into another process or into finished goods if the goods were finished all the way. So if you need to take a second and look at these T accounts and refresh your memory as to how this works from Principles 2 and possibly your cost accounting class as well. Everything just keeps moving along in the process from the balance sheet onto the income statement. Alright, in regards to our weighted average process costing method, you guys have done weighted average stuff before, and we're also going to see a FIFO method as well in these two chapters, 17 and 18. We're going to see how to calculate the cost per equivalent unit under both of the methods. In the weighted average one, we're going to see that it's basically just an average, and it's going to be divvied up between the work in process inventory that's remaining and then those items that are transferred out. So we're going to total up all our cost and divide it out by the total equivalent units of work done to date. It's pretty easy. This case 3, though, is going to show us what it's going to look like if we actually do have a balance being brought forward from a prior period. Again, we're going to pick up where we left off with work in process remaining from case 2. Alright, so how many did we have left over in case 2? We had 225 units. So that's going to be our starting point for our process costing form. So we've got work in process beginning of 225 units. Then we started an additional 275 units in this period. So apparently this is March, since the one we just looked at is February. Therefore, we have a total number of units to account for of 500. 225 plus 275 equals 500. In regards to the process, how many of those 500 did we complete 100% of the way and transfer out during the period? Well, we did 400 units. So here we've got completed and transferred out during the current period, 400. 500 minus that 400, we apparently have 100 still left in the process. As to those 100, they're only partially converted, so we've got to recall, we've got to do some equivalent unit calculations. Our double checking figure here, how many have we accounted for? 400 plus 100 equals 500. 500 is equal to 500. We're good to go as far as showing our physical flow of units. Now let's do step 2. We've got to calculate the equivalent units. Again, having that assumption that all direct materials are being introduced into the process when the units are began. As to direct materials completed and transferred out during the current period, they, of course, have 100% of their direct materials. So 400 times 100% equals 400. They are also complete as to conversion. So 400 units times 100% equals 400 equivalent units as to conversion cost. Dropping down to the work in process inventory, again, assuming that all direct materials are dropped into the process when the units are started, then as to direct materials, these 100 units have 100% of their direct materials. So 100 times 100 equals 100 equivalent units as to direct materials. However, our units are only 50% complete. In other words, they're halfway done. They're not ready to be finished goods or transferred onto another process. So 100 times 0.5 means equivalent units as to conversion cost of only 50. Therefore, we can add up our direct materials equivalent units. 400 plus 100 equals 500 units as to equivalent units for direct materials. And 400 plus 50 equals 450 in equivalent units as to conversion cost. And these are the numbers that we're going to pick up here in a little while and use those in our steps 3, 4, and 5. Alright, work work in process, the fact that we had beginning inventory means that we've got some beginning costs that are being brought forward on our balance sheet in regards to the inventory here. So if we were to go back, we discussed the fact that we had $18,000 in direct materials cost and $8,100 in conversion cost for those beginning 225 units for a total of $26,100. Now again, we're doing the weighted average method here, okay? So we're basically going to just lump all these costs together, use our equivalent units, and calculate our cost and divvy everything up. Okay, it's pretty easy. It just throws everything together. The FIFO method's going to be a little bit different. Everybody in accounting knows FIFO means first in, first out. So when we see that method here in a few moments, you're going to see how it's different. Recall that this is another period, and this is apparently March. We have added some additional cost in this period for the direct materials for the units that we started this month, some of which got completed, some of which are still work in process. And then we converted so many of them got converted 100%, and so many of them got converted up to 50%. These are those costs: $19,800 for direct materials, $16,380 for conversion costs. Taking those two and adding them together equals $36,180. We then sum up the columns so that we can see what are the total costs that we need to account for. So this is one of our check figures. If we add these up, we've got a total production cost of $62,280, and that $62,280 has got to be divvied up between finished goods, or the items that were finished and transferred out, and what is remaining in work in process. And this is going to be our final total. We can also look at it broken down by direct materials and conversion cost. Going down to step 4, we need to calculate our cost per equivalent unit. Therefore, we're going to take the cost incurred to date, which is the total amount incurred to date, which includes the beginning work in process cost plus the cost added this period. So $37,800, we're bringing that number down, and $24,480 as to conversion and bringing it down. Now we need to go back up to step 2 and find our equivalent units. We had 500 as to direct materials equivalent units, and we had 450 equivalent units as to conversion cost. 24,480 divided by 450 equals 54.40 per unit, and 37,800 divided by 500 equals 75.60 per unit. So that is our cost per equivalent unit of work done today. Going down to step 5, let's assign those costs now. The completed units, again, there were 400 units that were completed and transferred out. Those need to have $75.60 per unit assigned to them for direct materials, and $54.40 per unit assigned to them for conversion costs. They are 100% as to direct materials. They are 100% as to conversion cost. They get the full brunt of both of those. So if you were to get out your calculator, 400 units times 75.60 equals 30,240 as to direct materials. And then for our conversion cost, again, 400 units, 100% complete, times 54.40 per unit equals 21,760. If we were to add those two numbers up, it would give us 52,000. What would we do? We would use that number to either debit into another work in process account for another process and credit it out of this work in process, or we would debit it into finished goods inventory and credit it out of this work in process account. In regards to the work in process ending value, this number needs to be shown still on the balance sheet. We had 100 units. They got 100% of their direct materials. Therefore, 100 at 100% times 7560 per equivalent unit gives us $7,560 here for their direct materials part. And these units were only 50% converted. Okay, so they were only halfway done. Therefore, they only get 50 equivalent units. Okay, so if we had spent all that time converting, we could have only converted 50, 100% of the way. Alright, so 100 times 0.5 equals 50 equivalent units. Those 50 equivalent units times 54.40 per equivalent unit in conversion cost would give us $27.20 right here. Actually, did I type something in wrong? 4.4. Okay. Adding those two numbers together, we would have 10,280 as to those 100 units left in working process. That would be their value. Could we calculate our cost per unit for those 400 units this month? Yes, we could. $52,000 divided by 400 units means our average cost there would be $130 per unit, right? So $130 per unit using that weighted average method. With the weighted average method and how we calculate the cost for each unit completed and transferred out, basically, again, you're looking at just an average cost. The FIFO is going to be a little bit different. You're going to see that it's a little more distinctive in how we go about assigning the cost. And in regards to seeing some differences over time, the FIFO is going to give us a little bit better view of when our costs are fluctuating. But the weighted, it's averaging it in there, it's not so evident. So the weighted average process costing method calculates the equivalent unit cost of all the work done to date, regardless of the accounting period in which it was done. We then assign this cost to equivalent units completed and transferred out of the process and to equivalent units in ending work in process. And I am going to stop there, and I will show you a FIFO example in the next video.